You know I couldn't be a bigger fan of this lady. Sharri Markson is the national political editor for the Daily Telegraph. She's zooming in from her home office right now, so inspect the books behind her. Lovely to see you, mate. So you broke phenomenal story, a story about Five Eyes countries, suspicions about where all of the viruses come from, and, of course, the shit has hit the fan. Is it not amazing to you that there are people like Bob Carr, the Channel 9 newspapers, who are more interested in where the story came from than what China has, or more importantly, has not been doing for the past few months?
We didn't dress this story up as anything other than what it was. We said it was a dossier or research paper, that's how I described it in my story, prepared by concerned Western governments. That shows the agenda there, concerned Western governments. And what were they concerned about? About China's cover-up after the outbreak of coronavirus. And the document was factual, not intelligence. It laid it all out there factually, 15 pages of it, of how China had covered up the virus since the very early days when it first started to find out about it. This is the disappearance of doctors, the destruction and suppression of evidence, the cleaning up and bleaching of the wet market before proper samples could be taken. It just goes through it factually. And so first the complaint is that there's no intelligence in it, and now the complaint seems to be just from watching Media Watch that there is no intelligence in it. They can't have it both ways. And Bob Carr, who couldn't be more compromised on China, there is no figure in Australia more compromised on China than Bob Carr. He was paid by China in his previous line of work at the UTS Institute, or rather, it was set up with funding from Chinese figures. He couldn't be more compromised, and he's not calling for an inquiry like Scott Morrison, the US, many other nations are, into how China and the World Health Organization handled the outbreak. What is he calling for an inquiry into? Is into how this dossier prepared by two Western governments was released to the media.
And then you've got Kevin Rudd out there in the Turnbull Times suggesting that all of this is some sort of, evil Murdoch conspiracy where you're acting on the behalf of the US government to desperately try to get Donald Trump re-elected. Geez, they think a lot more goes on behind the scenes than it actually does. Last time I checked, you're a reporter who works her ass off and breaks uncomfortable truths day after day after day.
They seem to think that news should be censored if it doesn't fit a political agenda. Well, that's not what we do at News Corp. That's just not what we do. If there's a story, we run it. This story was a research report from Western governments. It deserved to be published. Which journalist in the planet wouldn't publish it if they got something like that? Of course we ran it. Then last week, as you pointed out on your show the other night, I found out that there were sections of the Australian bureaucracy who were uncomfortable with the extent of Donald Trump's language in saying that there was strong evidence that this virus accidentally leaked from a Wuhan laboratory. And, they were even making comparisons that it was weapons of mass destruction Mark II. We reported that on the front page too. We report the news. We report what's going on. We don't report an agenda. And yet you've got Bob Carr and Kevin Rudd wanting censorship of the news because they seem to be perhaps adopting Chinese values where the media is state-run, where they do run a line, where they do censor the truth and cover up facts. We don't do that.
Yeah, the selective, literally, the same real estate, the same front page, the same screaming front page headline was about potentially WMD Mark II. But let's talk about the interrelated relationships that have now started to exist in Australian universities, Australian taxpayer funds, Chinese Communist Party money as well. Is it a two-way street where Australian money is in China and China's money is in Australia?
Yeah, look, there's been research collaboration for a long time, with the CSIRO, some 40 years. And that's, a good thing that the international scientific community collaborates. Where it's a problem is the story that I wrote today on the front page, where you have a scientific paper on the origins of the coronavirus and how it was transmitted from animals to humans. It was published in an esteemed medical journal, one of the best in the world, called Nature. But what wasn't disclosed was that the laboratory that did the genetic sequencing and virus isolation for this study was a PLA, a People's Liberation Army laboratory. And they state the name of the lab, but not that it was a PLA lab. And they thank someone called Wu Chan Kao in the acknowledgements. He is a PLA member and he's got the rank of colonel. It's quite extraordinary. So that is where this does become problematic, when you're not disclosing that you're using genetic sequencing and virus isolation that's been prepared by a PLA lab. That's a clear conflict of interest that could potentially compromise the study. And it's into the origins of the coronavirus. You know, we need this to be independent.